I'm Mary Fitzgerald, the CEO of Eluna, and it's an honor to welcome you all to today's second installment of our cultural series on grief. Thank you all for sharing your why and being here today, and for the impactful work you are doing in our communities. Eluna's mission is to support children and families impacted by grief or addiction through our 3 signature programs, Camp Erin, Camp Mariposa, and the Eluna Resource Center. Witnessing division, injustice, and hate in our world, it is our aim that coming together for these conversations contributes to the ongoing fight against racism. Through this series, we are focused on building a better understanding of the cultural factors that inform grief, so our families, our communities, and the childhood bereavement field can be best equipped with the knowledge and tools to support grieving families from all cultures. Today's conversation is focused on exploring grief through the lens of Black communities. While the experience of being Black in America may vary greatly, our panel will highlight shared cultural and systematic factors that may play a role in the grieving process. We have a great panel here today, and I would like to thank all of our accomplished panelists for the vital work they continue to do in creating understanding around diversity and grief, for bringing awareness to the complexities of childhood bereavement, and for supporting youth and families in their grieving process. I'd also like to thank our Resource Center Director, Molly Hassan, and her team for creating this series, their passionate work in launching it, and for all the support they deliver every day to our children and families. It is now my pleasure to get this going and introduce you to and welcome back our moderator from our last community conversation series, Jennifer Lewis Hall. Jennifer is the host and producer of Philadelphia, PHL 17's In Focus program, where she has built an exceptional career in network television and multimedia, shining a spotlight on issues impacting our communities. Jennifer just found out, I heard, she will be inducted into the Mid-Atlantic Emmys Silver Circle Lifetime Achievement Circle for her work in journalism. Congratulations, Jennifer. She was also awarded the Pennsylvania Broadcasters Award for Outstanding TV Feature for her piece, 2 Women on the Front Lines of the Opioid Epidemic. She holds a master's in journalism from Northwestern and a bachelor's in economics and finance from Douglas College at Rutgers University. For over 2 decades, she doesn't look it, she has been an accomplished and outstanding journalist, receiving many awards and accolades, including the Camden County Medal of Freedom in 2021. Please join me in welcoming Jennifer Lewis Hall.
Mary, it is a pleasure to join you. It is a pleasure to be here with your team and all of the people who are on this particular community conversation today. Working with the community changes lives. And I think that's the reason why early on in my career, over 3 decades ago, I got involved in this. It was exciting to be, yes, on TV or behind the scenes, meeting people and finding out interesting things. But this is really what makes a difference. So, you know, I think about Eluna and all of the groups that I talk to each week and the people behind them and the stories that need to be told. So thank you for allowing me to join you. Once again, it is my pleasure. It is a distinguished panel here, and I'm really calling folks with us, not only public health professionals and so many other things, but they are leaders in our local communities. They're going to introduce themselves, give us a little information about who they are, and then we will begin with our first question today. So welcome everyone who's joining us. We're going to spend some time exploring some very poignant questions and the impact of grief in our community. I want to start with just the introduction. We're going to begin, Lamont, with you first, followed by, that's Lamont Robinson, Eluna board member and parent to grieving children. If you would please introduce yourself as well.
Hi, as you stated, Lamont Robinson. I'm the Director of Supplier Diversity for AmerisourceBergen, and grief for me is something that obviously has been passionate in terms of a plight, in terms of how can we help those, especially in underserved communities. I grew up on the west side of Chicago in a economically deprived community where violence, unfortunately, was rampant, and so I've seen grief in different forms and fashion. Whether it's family members getting killed, family members trying to kill others, having a father that was not in a household. Unfortunately, the stories that we hear over and over again. But grateful to be on this panel and grateful to, hopefully share some wisdom, but then also more importantly, learn things. We've got a very impressive panel, and I'm excited to be a part of this.
Indeed, and thank you, Lamont, so much for being here and telling your story. I know people really want to hear what you have to say and the experiences that you have had. Alicia Alexander, licensed clinical social worker and author, is with us.
So greetings to everyone. I am really, really excited for this conversation, and I identify as a therapist, author, and certified thanatologist, as well as engaging a new walk as a grieving, active griever, and the parent of a grieving young person. So this is kind of where the professional and the personal meet. And so I'm excited to engage my own vulnerability and to hold space for everyone else's.
Alicia, thank you. Dr. Laverne Mosley of the Boston Medical Center.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Laverne Mosley, and I am at Boston Medical Center in Boston, Massachusetts. I am a licensed psychologist and assistant professor of psychiatry at Boston University Medical Center. And I work primarily in our child and adolescent psychiatry department there at Boston Medical Center. I'm also the CEO of Empowerment Counseling, a group counseling practice in Massachusetts and Rhode Island. And I've done a lot of work with grieving children and trauma. And so I hope that there's a lot that I could bring to the conversation today, just about what that experience is like for our young folks.
Indeed, and we know that you can, and we're thankful for you being here. Dr. Stacy Scott, Executive Director, Baby First Network.
Hello, thanks for having me here today. I am Dr. Stacy Scott. I am the Executive Director of Baby First Network. It's a nonprofit organization that is committed to providing support to families who have lost children, babies particularly as far as sudden and unexpected. We do a lot of education around safe sleep practices. We serve as an agent for the state of Ohio based on a law that we have that any family member, any parents who have lost a child under the age of 2 should be afforded a bereavement home visit. So we manage all of that. We provide training to public health nurses and other professionals in how to deal with bereavement support. And we have, in the last year and a half, really embarked on understanding more about the impact of Black infant loss due to the high disparities that we see of Black infant death. And so we have really began to do a series of articles and blogs and workshops around, again, looking at the social determinants of grief and the impact of Black infant loss. Thank you.
Yes, so very important, Dr. Scott. And Veronica Land-Davis, licensed clinical social worker and Executive Director, Roberta's House. And we do need you to, I think we're not getting your audio.
This better. Good evening, everyone. Afternoon. I'm Veronica Land-Davis, the Executive Director here at Roberta's House. We are a family grief support center in the center of Baltimore City. We are the only grief support center that are really looking at providing grief support trauma work for families that are dealing with grief, loss, and trauma. I've been working with families, adults, teens for many, many years, and grief and loss is definitely one of the, unfortunately, issues that we don't many clinicians don't appear to really look at how does grief impact trauma. So being here at Roberta's house allows me to be a change agent and making sure that our children and families get the services they need in order to deal with this messy thing called grief.
Thank you so much, Veronica, and I think you said it so well, and all of you really relaying not only the power of your work in a few sentences, but why it is so necessary. And we're going to explore that and a number of other points today as we get your perspective. I want to jump into the first question. We are going to direct that to Dr. Scott, but we want to talk about why is grief experienced in communities of color different? Why is that different? Because grief is grief, no matter who you are and you're experiencing it. It is a profound aspect of our lives and often difficult to deal with. And what about our experiences and what we're seeing others go through makes it different? I saw something on a report recently as I was preparing for this, and it talked about grief in Black communities as a hidden pandemic. It also mentioned a particular medical journal talking about African Americans being more likely, according to this report, to experience profound grief. And that in itself is huge. So today we come with something on a report recently as I was preparing for this report. Dr. Scott, let's start with you. As a 30-year public health advocate, one of the first questions we have is, please help us understand the impact of what's often called intergenerational trauma and how the legacy of even slavery that we often talk about can show up in our children and our families.
Well, I think all of the things that you just mentioned was, right on. I look at grief and the work that we do from a historical perspective to understand the impact of enslavement, to understand the journey of the Middle Passage, and really to understand what our ancestors and our enslaved brothers and sisters had to experience, not only with slavery, but moving into that of segregation, looking at even before that, the Jim Crow era. All of these things continue to tear away at the very soul of our communities. And so looking at that and the issue that you deal with, racism and all of these other pieces that come to play, we see looking at comparing that to what people call that regular grief, if there's such a thing, and everybody grieves differently, but that the complicated grief that we see as a community, the inability to keep your loved ones safe, that is a huge thing that is everybody wish as a parent, being able to keep a child safe or being able to keep a spouse safe. That's one big thing. In addition to that, we grieve the future because, again, we don't know what the future has in store for us. And so that takes on a whole nother piece. So to have to carry that burden of everyday survival, understanding that I don't have the ability to do the things that many people do, understanding I'm living in an America that not necessarily have my best interest at me. How do you deal with that? You know what I mean? And so I think this workshop is going to be great, this webinar, because I know that all of us here on this panel will be able to speak to that. But I think for me, that what makes Black grief unique. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and there's so many layers and there's so many years of experiences, right, involved in this, Dr. Scott. We're going to kind of move it along because we want to get in a lot of questions. So, Dr. Mosley, you've had extensive work with children and families. How can you speak to compound trauma and how it shows up in behaviors that may oftentimes be misunderstood?
If children are walking around in a space where they're just constantly in a state of anxiety or feeling that, something is going to happen, that they don't feel safe, it starts to play on, their emotions as well as their behaviors and just their regular existence every day. if you're now, walking through life, not sure if you are safe because you're living in an unsafe environment, you're living in communities, just as Lamont had mentioned, seeing other people, seeing family members, killing others, or just witnessing that kind of violence on a day-to-day basis. This is just part of your regular experience, just your regular day-to-day exposure. It's very difficult for a person or a child, no less, to even just be able to feel relaxed, to be able to move through life and enjoy just those things that we may take for granted. There, is this sense of, having to always be on guard, this sense of always having to watch your back, because you're operating in a life where there doesn't feel like there is any safety. And when we think about this compounded trauma, there is like what I identify as like a transgenerational persistence of trauma, because this is something that is going down from, grandparents, great grandparents. It's not safe out there. And so if you're growing up in an environment where you're not feeling safe and you're seeing all of the things that are happening on television, you're seeing what's happening just as you open your door. I think about the many kids that I have even treated in my practice who have witnessed someone even being shot right outside their window, or they're seeing a dead body even as they're walking through their neighborhood. They are hearing gunshots. They have, they know that if they're hearing certain sounds, they need to duck down on the floor. If there's a child who is walking through life having to, have this as part of what defines their growing up period, of course, it's going to impact their ability to learn. It's going to impact their ability to be able to connect with others. I've heard of some of my patients even say, I don't even want to really connect, right, with anyone because I'm afraid that they're not going to be here. So then we start to look at how our attachments are being marred by the environments and the spaces that our young people are growing up in. They're not connected to anyone, right? So then this starts to also impact, their level of even compassion towards others. Life is not necessarily as sacred as we may have thought. And so it really makes things even more complicated when we talk about this, compounded grief. There's a very heavy weight.
And with that weight, Dr. Mosley, before I move on with our panelists, and we also said behavior that could be misunderstood.
Yes.
So behaviors can come out of that. You're telling us from a clinical perspective. I'm going to say, I'm not the therapist, but that could be unhealthy, or, that someone is saying, acting out, there's many things you're saying can come from that.
That can come from that. Absolutely. So there may be aggression, or, because a person is walking in a space where they're feeling, that there's a possibility of being attacked, or they're not feeling safe, they may present as more aggressive, right? It may be misunderstood. They're just trying to protect their space, trying to create boundaries, trying to create, space for themselves. And so it may be misunderstood or not quite understood by maybe teachers or other people they may come in contact with, because there's always this air of having to, feel that, you have to protect yourself.
Yeah. Wow. And Alicia, we want to get to you, because in your book, Tapestries, you talked about the many ways that, your life has been impacted. Just in your introduction, you explore the layers of loss, its impact on children's development. Can you expand upon this intersection, intergenerational trauma? We heard that term, and a child's identity development.
Sure. And to just piggyback on Dr. Scott and Dr. Mosley both, engaging the fact that not only are we looking at the identification and definition of safety, but we're also looking at who am I as a safe person. And so often we are actually asked to define that outside of ourselves, outside of our community. And so if we look at where we actually have to go to for support, it is in an institution or institutional setting that doesn't reflect us. So if we're looking at how we do engage our pain, even that definition sometimes gets taken away from us, that power to define, here is where my pain is, here is who I'm grieving, because we have messages all around that say, okay, that absentee father, or that addicted parent, or that person who completed suicide or was murdered. There's a stigma attached even to how we identify with that loved one, because the key word there, they're still loved one in their complexity, in all of the grief that they have introduced into the family system. So even identifying, am I still a daughter if I don't know who my father is? Am I still a son if I don't have this male role model in my home? Am I a good boy? Am I a good girl? You know, all of those kind of loaded, seemingly benign labels that we can give children, it impacts how they see themselves. And we have a lot of what I call influencer energy, which is we aren't the only folks that are influencing these young people. There's social media, there's being able to see themselves represented in healthy relationship. All of those things are almost, I hate to be alarmist, but under attack, even from a popular culture standpoint. There aren't a lot of healthy representations of family on television. There are not a lot of ways that we're allowed to define ourselves outside of the news, the headlines.
So role models, images, and all of this playing a part as you are telling us from where you have been and what you have encountered. And you write about this also, again, the book is Tapestries. Lamont, we want to get to you because, you know, as we learned as a child who lived through the loss of a parent at a young age yourself, how do these perspectives land for you and your experiences as someone who's experienced so much grief? Tell us about your story to put this in perspective.
So, Jennifer, my loss as a parent came not from death, but my dad didn't know who I was. And so my mom and my dad conceived me, and she didn't tell him that she was pregnant because, you know, he was married. And so, unfortunately, I was raised without knowing who my real father was, or really any father for that matter. So for me, the main element or impact of that was that it took away my right to feel protected, you know, especially in a neighborhood like that where you have young boys that unfortunately, most of us didn't have fathers, but they at least knew who their father was. And so it's like taking your tree and you only know half the story. And so, you know, even though I had a strong mother, I can clearly see how young boys are recruited into the gang life. And I think the only reason why I wasn't recruited is because I had an older brother who unfortunately was the closest to a father figure I had, but he led a local gang. And so he protected me in terms of getting recruited in that gang. But guess what? If I go outside that neighborhood, which I did one time, I got shot at. And so from that perspective, not having a dad gave me the feeling of anxiety, like Dr. Mosley said. It gave me PTSD because, you know, you go through life as an adult holding on and clutching on to relationships because you don't want to feel like you've been abandoned again. So I think really the root of a lot of gang interaction and recruitment come from the fact that you may not have father figures that are there to protect you. So that's why I said it took away my right to feel protected.
And let me just ask you in this moment, because it's so important to hear your voice as one of the men in our community. How did that make you feel? How did that impact you?
You know, it impacted me. And first of all, the work that I do in supplier diversity is driven specifically because of the fact that I grew up in an area like I did, where the only the males that I saw in the neighborhood were drug dealers for the most part. We didn't see many white collar or any white collar jobs, and not that they didn't exist, but just in my specific neighborhood. So for me, it makes me feel like I have a purpose to make sure that I pass it along to the next generation to let them know that they can be entrepreneurs. Because the first time that I saw an entrepreneur that looked like me was on the Jeffersons. You know, I didn't realize that it was possible until I saw George Jefferson owning dry cleaning stores. So I had to use television as a way to be able to get uplifted, to know that it was possible. So again, so I take it on as a challenge to myself and to grow and help communities that were similar to the ones that I grew up in to be able to thrive.
Yeah. Lamont, as we also look at other young people in our community, and you talked about being a young African-American male, do you feel like that's also transcending and happening right now?
You know, I think it is happening. The challenge of it is that, you know, my mom and her family migrated from the South in the 50s. And so you had closer neighborhoods because geographically we were more positioned that way. And so I think once you started having, you know, just neighborhoods being torn down, gentrification happening in different parts of the country, you started separating these neighborhoods. And now all of a sudden, you've got block to block activity. So I think it happens, but I think it happens in more pockets because it has to happen in pockets versus in the past, and especially in the neighborhood I grew up in, we had 10 buildings in that one neighborhood. So it was a little easier to do it that way versus having a neighborhood that's segregated, then integrated, then segregated, then integrated. So it's just a struggle more, I think, physically or geographically.
Yeah, thank you so much. Of course, we're going to be talking and hearing more of your perspective. Veronica, we definitely want to get to you right now with your experiences as a social worker. What would we do without our mental health professionals, our social workers, our teachers, those who are helping others, but particularly those who are able to connect us with our mental health, our physical health resources? That's a role in so often that social workers play. Executive Director of Roberta's House in Baltimore, you let us know that. Is there anything that you really want to add to this part of the discussion and the poignant discussion of the grief we often feel?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to wrap up and say this. As clinicians, as behavioral health professional caregivers, we have to realize that this is about communal grief. This is about looking at grief beyond just the individual, but how does it impact the whole community? And that is one of the things that we really do try to focus on here at Roberta's House. You work with the individual, you work with the individual child, but you can't really serve people if you don't understand the bigger picture. So being able to really assess communal grief as well as individual grief, I think helps us to begin the healing process. So we got to think about the bigger picture. We got to think about how the pieces equal the whole. And you can't think about individuals without looking at the community at large. And that's both physical losses as well as non-physical losses.
Would you say that more people need to connect, if they can, with a social worker, seek out those types of resources? Because sometimes I often don't hear like, hey, did you know there's a connection between this service and this issue? And that could be that social worker. I know there's so much work to be done. People oftentimes tell us, well, they're not going to have time for your case, or they're not going to be able to see you. What do you want us to continue to do?
I want us to continue to advocate for our families. I want us as professionals, as social workers, to understand that we make the difference between what healing looks like, feel like for children and families, especially when we're talking about Black grief. And that understanding that most of us come from environments in which going to the therapist was not the first thing that we did. We went to churches, we went to our pastors, we went to different religious personnel in order to deal with that thing called grief, loss, and trauma. So now we're really trying to work with our community, the communities of Black communities around the world, around the United States, here in Baltimore City, to say it's okay to seek help. It's okay to go and figure out, how does grief impact what I'm dealing with? Why I hurt? Why I'm using substance, misusing, abusing? But at the end of the day, I can tell you that we have to begin looking at communal losses.
Oh, thank you for that. That's powerful. And something you said, it's okay, seek help, and to encourage others, to do that. You may not be that clinical professional, but to keep encouraging people to do that. We want to get to the next kind of thought process here. What are some of the barriers to getting grief support? I think you even told us one of those, Veronica, is just even asking for help, giving yourself permission to do that. Lamont, I want to start with you. You've experienced both, being a grieving teen, as you explained to us about, not knowing your dad, to grieving children. So what are some of those barriers and how can we push past it?
So I had lost my first wife. We married for 20 years and lost her. And so then I became a widowed father of 5. And so you want to talk about, and let me back it up. I lost my mom 2 years before that. So she was really my rock. And so when you don't have that and you have now 5 grieving children, you do revert back and just, you get a feel for how you grieved as a kid. For me, fortunately, what I did was I used the way that I grieved as a kid, which was really, you were taught to you saw it so much that you just became numb at times, and you internalized it a lot. And again, as a young boy, you were told to just toughen up and, get over it. So as a parent, I wanted to make sure that my kids didn't have that. But the challenge of it is that I then lost my job about 6 months after losing my wife. And so then financially, the limitations were there. And so that's what it showed me, is that when you have financial limitations, you don't necessarily have, or you don't know how to obtain the best help that's out there. And then I had kids that I had to influence on them that counseling was important, so for them, they thought, if I go in there, they're not going to tell me anything. And then it became garbage in, garbage out. So if you don't share anything, they're not mind readers. You've got to be able to share. So it was really an education to my kids in terms of letting them see how important it was to seek counseling. I sought counseling myself because I had to be an example for them, to show them that in order to embrace it, I had to get it myself. So that's how it was for me. And there were a lot of things that I think I pushed aside for my own grieving as a kid that I needed to get out. And so that's why for me, it was important to get that professional help, because number one, I had 5 kids that I needed to raise. And then the second part of it was that, there were some doors that I had closed a long time ago that I thought I had overpassed, I had overcome it. And I didn't. I never properly grieved until I really sought professional counseling.
A powerful statement. Lamont, thank you for being so candid with us about that. Alicia, talk us through something here. Talk us through what it might look like for a Black family to access grief camps, support groups. What can we do? What can we say? What's the best pathway?
Sure. So to both Lamont and Veronica's point, accessing help is probably the biggest hurdle in a therapeutic alliance, in a quest for support. Because again, we have this historical kind of institutional distrust. We have resistance to going to the doctor. We have resistance to letting people in. And even if we view social workers as support, there's the risk involved of disclosing the difficulties for fear of children being taken out of the home. Certainly as a social worker myself, I often tell kids, I'm not that social worker, right? Like, I am going to work to keep you in your home. I'm working to keep you in a functional space. And so even in relationship to accessing support groups, grief camps, grief programming, period. Number one, we have to address the fact that we don't even know that these things exist, right? Like camp, even as a kind of context, is probably foreign to us because very few of us have access to recreational, extracurricular, programming. So going to a grief camp is a new concept, and it's one that we can engage both with excitement, and it's an opportunity, but there's also the space of taking a child, a teen, out of their family systems, out of their community, and sending them away to deal with themselves, deal with their feelings. So that's a barrier. That could be as a generational and cultural barrier to accessing help, which is, okay, this child goes away, this teen goes away and has this wonderful experience, and then has the pressure of having to activate and continue self-regulating back in their community, back in their homes where nobody else got this support.
So you can go away, but you may be coming back to deal with the very same issues or
Same
something
stuff.
similar.
Absolutely. And so that can shut people down. That can shut a community down from accessing the beautiful supports that are out there. Roberta's House is one of those. Eluna, Camp Aaron. I see y'all have some spots still open in your camp at Roberta's House, so y'all sign up. But there's still the part of this, which is that camp is a foreign concept to people of difference, and engaging that we need support in our schools, that these community centers, the ways that we do access, talking to our doctors, our medical professionals, these are all access points that might not be evident to us because we are going to church, we're still praying, we're still going into a space of
Still hopeful.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Is it important then that we don't give up on accessing those services, to give it a try, to break through what may be also our own potential mental barrier?
Sure.
It's foreign to me. I've never tried it before. Is it going to be okay?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And saying we have got to try to do more of that. Is that one solution or way to look at it?
Absolutely. And I think if you also take a look at, someone had a wonderful question earlier on around describing funeral practices and engaging ritual as a part of Black grief. And I want to say two things. I want to say the fact that, Black grief is not monolithic. Okay. There's a plethora of approaches to how we are holding bereavement, how we are moving together in that communal space. Pandemic has changed how we have had to do this. And there's a huge opportunity for us to connect digitally. There's a huge opportunity for us to really look at all the access points that we do have. But we're still looking at 1 in 3 African-American does not access or even have an access point to mental health support. So pandemic certainly shed a big light on what the needs are, and that's the work ahead of us. To Veronica's point about we're looking into the future, Dr. Scott, I think, made that point too, but that future facing us, how do we move in this communal moment is important.
Okay. And you said something important, and I'm going to touch upon that with you, Alicia. I just want to plant this seed so we don't, so that I don't forget also. I want to just say trust. I hear you speaking to trust. Can I trust you? Can I trust that you will, if I send my child, will they be okay? Can I trust you with my burdens, my problems, my issues, historically? What has happened as we look at a number of things in terms of health and medicine. Can I trust you? So we should also touch upon that. Dr.
Yes.
Scott, you have worked with teens in juvenile detention and children. Talk to us a little bit about stigma. I mean, this is something I cover also with, in my opioid special and other specials I have done, the stigma associated oftentimes with things, and how much that, as people explain to me and experts explain, how difficult it can be to get past that. Tell us about getting around that and dealing with mental health support.
Well, I think the issue is, and I'm going to use a term that's probably not most clinical, but from what we say, we've been down so long that down doesn't bother us anymore. Mm-hmm. So the first thing you have to recognize is that there is a problem. You know what I mean? But if we have operated and coped for so long in just making it and in this survival mode, we don't even have the ability to understand that there is something wrong. And I even laugh sometimes when I talk to people, and even with myself, that when we start feeling good, we think something's wrong with that because we have been operating in that. In working, I had the opportunity to work in juvenile detention with young men who were being certified as adults for crimes they had committed. And we did a series of kind of support groups helping to prepare them to go over into the adult jail. Really from the standpoint that at that time I worked in rape crisis, and we knew these young men would be at a greater risk of being molested going into an adult jail. They were like 15.
So these were juveniles certified as adults. Okay.
Yes, yes. And so we did this great activity with them because many of them didn't feel that they were going to live past 20 or 21 years of age. And so what we did is I had all of them to look at the obituaries in the newspaper and had them to read them. And then I had them to imagine that they were living to the age of 65. And I said, now I want you to write your obituary based on the fact that you have lived to 65 and 70 years old. And what are the things that you have accomplished in these years? It was amazing because you could see their wheels turning because they never even thought that they would get past a certain age. Many of them said that they had a number of children because they felt that before they were able to leave this planet, that they could keep their seeds could be continued. And they also believed that many of the children that became fathered would not make it either. So the more children you had, the better, because you felt that there was a survival, at least one or two of your descendants would continue. It was amazing in reading these obituaries of the things that they said they had accomplished. Many of them talked about their grandfathers. I was from the Midwest, so everybody worked for Ford or Jeep. So they talked about how they retired from the factories, what they were able to do, their grandchildren, what they were able to accomplish. And you could just see the wheels turn in their heads going, man, you know, this is a possibility. Now, you know, the issue, unfortunately, many of them were now going over, but we wanted to believe that at least they began to understand that there is hope at the end of the tunnel, that there is some light there. And that I think that's the thing in listening to the panelists talk about living in that survival mode or living in the fact that I've seen so much death that I can't make that attachment. But not only that, I can't even imagine surviving beyond my early years. And so for that, I operate in this very hazardous kind of place, you know, that I'm just living every day like it's my last day. So I think that that is something that I see. And one last thing, I hear people talk about going to the camps and all of that. I just want to make sure that as we send our children and our families to these places, that there's somebody on the other side that can provide the type of support they need. Because if you're not trained well, you can even increase that trauma. Right. You know what I'm saying? And that's the thing. So just because the service is there doesn't mean that it is what we need if it is not based on who we are as a people, understanding our history, understanding the impact of racism and all of these things. So it's so important that as counselors or whatever, that we are, definitely grounded and rooted into the experience of a people. Thank you.
Yeah, and Dr. Scott, people are, echoing that sentiment in the chat, talking about that is a great point, because I think, and I, to Eluna's credit and everyone joined here today, I think that's a very important component to have these discussions. And I would also say to any organization or group, in my eyes, I hear people's stories every day, and then I connect the vehicle for conversation. But I find oftentimes, wouldn't we be so much better off if we did communicate and listen to one another about what our needs are, our vulnerabilities, our strengths, but also tying that together and saying something that probably a lot of us grew up saying: if you don't know, say so. And if you don't know how to do it, or should I say this, or is it okay? It's never a wrong thing to say, I don't know. And so that's why I like this, because we might not know how to communicate with someone who's dealing with systemic trauma, and they may look fine, but you don't know what they're going through. And we're going to get to that in the next section of this. Before I do that, Veronica, quickly, because I mean, wow, I wish we had unlimited time. What do you want people to know about, really about the strength of the Black community, and how showing up for each other is an important part of this too, being there for one another?
Well, I just need for us to realize that we have always been up and about, coming and being supportive of one another as a group of people. And it's important that we realize that how we see connection within our community, we cannot really, I guess, compare it to the white families, because our families look different. How we define families look different. So one of the things I would say is that as we work with families, as we work with families of diversity, as clinicians, as camp partners, camp buddies, we have to realize that families may be, most of us come from families in which they are family members that psychologically are family and not our biological. Mm-hmm. Most of us have aunties and uncles that are not by us, not by our family, but because we started dealing with the village and how important it is for the village to take care of each other. This has become part of what we do in our families. So I want people to know that sometimes we overlook the resiliency that our community have. When Dr. Scott talked about and started off with this whole conversation about, slavery, it is resiliency. And when I see our families come here in Roberta's house and they are dealing with all types of stressors, the mere fact that they can get up, get dressed, and come to our doors says that this is a resilient group of people. So make no mistake that we cannot run around with the misconceptions of what the Black community looks like and can do for its family. So that is the message, the very pointed and very powerful message that I feel from the bottom of my heart, that there are a lot of creative, a lot of good people. And Dr. Scott, when you raised the concern about, Camp Aaron, I could tell you, as an organization that serves minority Afro-American families, our curriculum is geared towards the people we serve. You can't serve people you don't understand. So I want us to understand, and everybody on this webinar to understand, that we come with a lot of strength. Make no mistake.
Amen.
That's very comforting to know. I'm sure that's very comforting to know. But a very essential point, someone in the chat, I actually went back to it so I could see it fully. It talked about, someone was commenting on, Dr. Scott was talking about training, and it really caught me. And this person said, we white people working in Black communities should be immersing ourselves in learning about Black culture, listening, and reaching to Black voices. Now, this is in the chat. These aren't my words. Advocating for issues related to structural racism and knowing when to refer out to a biopic therapist. That's that person's perspective. Yes, Alicia.
Jennifer, yeah, I think it's also really important to that point, as well as to the robust conversation going on in the chat, which is to engage the fact that, again, this is not monolithic. And so there are many times, certainly in my own career, where I haven't been Black enough. Okay. And so even using all of the things that we do know, all of the training that is available, we can still have a distance that gets in the way of great support. And so being able to continue to engage our own loss history, our own narrative, our own identity is a key professional development space too.
Wow. Okay. And something I really want to get to is kind of the tier 3 of this. I wish we had unlimited time, but I'm going to zip through some of these, not in the essence of not wanting them to be thorough, but the lack of time. So how can we use this discussion, right? Everybody, excellent chat discussion, excellent comments and discussion here with our panelists. How can we use this discussion to inform, to help support children of color, our Black children who are dealing with so much at this time that you've just addressed? Laverne, if you could start with us, and we're going to try to keep it a little more brief. Can you talk about the importance of listening and building that trust, and address that when serving our children of color?
Right. It's huge as we think about, the young folks who are coming in. The trust actually has to start even from at the parental level. As I was thinking about even, the going to the camps and all that kind of stuff, like a lot of Black families, they're not sending their kids out for any overnight anywhere, right? So the idea of that, it's huge. But the other huge piece is the importance of cultural competence, right? And even as Alicia said, like, oh yeah, sometimes not feeling Black enough. I also think about some of the distance that I may have as a person who's of West Indian heritage, right? Like I'm originally from the Bahamas of Jamaican parents, right? So then, there's a difference that even comes in place of that as I'm dealing with African American clients, and how their feeling of trust may be different. Of course, coming in as a Black individual, yes, if there's a level of comfort that's there, right? But I feel that even our white counterparts, you have to do the work to access the material, to gain the knowledge, to be able to work within this space. It doesn't mean that good work can't be done, right? But you have to recognize, hey, if I'm not able to do this, how can I get consultation, right? To be able to figure out, what I can do to best serve the families that are coming to us. One of the things that I really enjoy about the hospital system that I'm in Boston, at Boston Medical Center, we've seen generations of families within this system. I can sit in there and they're telling me that they saw, Dr. So-and-so, their child, this person delivered their child and was the family medicine doctor that continued on with them and with their kids. And so there's this system of connection. There's this feeling of trust within, our medical facility that, I feel is pretty unique. And so in a lot of the talks that I've been doing, because I'm also finding that a lot of churches now, through all of the things that we've been experiencing through COVID, are now reaching out to kind of break that stigma around mental health and seeking help. And so the trust is starting to build. The momentum is building, right? And so if now people are they're touting when I do a lot of my talks at churches, I'm saying, yes, you can have Jesus and a therapist too. And so families are, that's resonating with them. And so they're feeling more comfortable now with, hey, I can actually go to, this place. If my doctor has now said, it's okay for me to see this particular therapist, or go into, talk to someone about my grief, or that, the fact that I'm not sleeping, so being able to talk about even some of the symptoms. If you're not sleeping, if you're having trouble remembering, if you're, if you're losing weight, you're waking up in just a dull, low mood all the, every day.
But see, even identifying these things as symptoms.
Yes.
Oftentimes we are living in a way that we don't know it is problematic.
Right.
We're living this way thinking this is normal.
Right.
And I think you're listing those off, and I'm saying to myself, oh my goodness, even identifying to tell someone, did you know that that's not okay? To tell that friend, that's not, that's not okay. You should be getting a good night's rest. You should be able to wake up without undue anxiety. A mother in the chat writing that she has, I believe it's young sons, as I read through that. And she's saying she is fearing, I believe, as she's saying, as they're growing into their manhood, as they do that. So she therefore has anxiety, according to her note there. So something to consider. Glad to hear that at least she's saying, when will I not feel that way? So, obviously our panelists, to that person in the chat saying, hey, then that's worthy and more than poignant to discuss. I think there's a lot of people feeling that. I have sons myself, and I feel that way sometimes as well.
I think also to her question, which is like, at what age does she start the talk? And to me, the grief talk is the gateway to the sex talk, the drug talk, your boyfriend has too many tattoos talk. I mean, it's a gateway talk, and it's such a universal space, and it requires no perfection. No perfection.
Sometimes I think as it could be as parents or caregivers or
Yes.
the folks that are caring for you. Boy, do we
Yes.
want to get it right. And sometimes, you know, I
Yes.
think we want to get it right. We work so hard that we may delay it, or we think too hard. So, you know, let some of the air out of the balloon. That's what I'm learning at this
Yes.
age. And that's, I know that's very unscientific to our panel, but I can
Right
only say,
on
don't be
point.
so hard on yourself. If you love somebody and you want to see them prosper, the words and the love will come through.
Yes.
One more thing I'd like to get across. I do want to have Veronica jump in with that connection to us for Eluna. Having built these spaces, you know, for young people, in particular Camp Aaron, and for children and families of color as well. Tell us just a little bit about the important component of both reaching people of color and also providing a comfortable place for them to grieve.
Yeah.
What have you seen happen that works?
Well,
We have about a minute.
Okay, I'm going to do a minute. So one of the things I want to make sure that I leave as a message is we have to intentionally place people in our organization that look like the people we serve. And that is very important to how we get people. We keep talking about trust, we keep talking about safety, but that's one. And the other quick thing I want to share is investing. People who feel like the organization is investing in them, in their community, will trust and will come out and will allow us to provide services. So let's intentionally have those hard conversations about intentionally hiring people that look like the people we serve and investing in the community. That's why we're here in the midst of Baltimore City, because we invested in the healing as an organization.
Wow, that is so important. I keep time every day, every second as we get on the air. And I always say a good conversation, I just wish it could last forever. It's never enough time, but this time was well spent. It was valuable. It was prosperous because it is hopeful and abundant in its message. And it evokes us to go out and continue to seek help. I have never, in the 37 years that I have covered stories as a reporter and an anchor, I have never seen so much in the way of a need for people to be able to come to people like you and say, you know, I'm going through something and I need help. And hopefully this will help you do what you do better. And it certainly helps me to continue to keep my eyes and ears and heart open. So thank you. I wanted to just close my portion with a little quote, if I can find it. I'm an author myself, but I grew up as a child with parents who loved Langston Hughes and the wonderful folks of their day. And this one says, "Hold fast to dreams. For if dreams die, life is a broken winged bird that cannot fly." That is the Langston Hughes. So let's continue to fly and support our communities and loved ones in a way that is so phenomenal. People won't believe it. Thank you for having me. I'm Jennifer Lewis Hall. You can find me at PHL 17, one of my specials, my show, Politics in Focus and In Focus on Saturdays and Sundays, and all the programming I do. Reach out. I would love to hear from you. I think they're going to put where you can find me on social media. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I want to thank the panelists, Alicia, Veronica, Lamont, Dr. Mosley, Dr. Scott, for all of the work that you do and for sharing your wisdom today. Such a big iceberg. I think we got a little bit below the tip, and I'm so proud of that. So thank you. I want to thank Jennifer Lewis Hall for her leadership in this conversation, really invaluable. She mentioned you can find her on her social channels. It is in the chat. I want to thank New York Life for sponsoring this installment of our series. I'd also like to thank my staff, Sarah and Megan and Wendy, my intern, for helping us develop this program. Please visit us at elunanetwork.org and click on the Resource Center for more grief-related resources. And if you have the means, please consider supporting Eluna by clicking on the donate button on our site. Do look for an email follow-up with a survey to help us inform future conversations. And there'll be more resources. Everyone's books are listed in there. So thank you so much for attending. I'm so grateful to our really esteemed panel, and just have a great day. And thank you so much for learning with us.